International Institute for Educational Planning, and it is my great delight to welcome you today. This is our third virtual-only debate. I hope that you were with us in October for our discussion on planning education during COVID-19. Is contingency planning the way forward? And in November, when we discussed resilience in higher education and the lessons to draw from COVID-19. The videos of these two strategic debates, and in fact, all of IAP's debates, are available to view on IAP's YouTube channel. In case you have not seen the slide, please choose your interpretation channel as you need it. English and French simultaneous interpretation are provided, and I want to thank in advance our esteemed interpreters. Nearly 1 year on from the first school closures, what do we know about the impact of the pandemic on the education workforce? In today's strategic debate, we seek to explore this question. This has probably been teachers' toughest school year as they found themselves on the front line in responding to the crisis. We all witnessed how, from one day to the next, teachers rose to the challenge of distance learning, innovating to keep our children engaged and learning. Discussions on how the pandemic is affecting the education workforce received relatively less attention than those focusing on learning and pupils. And in some ways, this is understandable because ensuring learning continuity has been the #1 priority of education systems around the world. But remember, learning continuity depends on teachers. In addition to prioritizing the protection, the safety, and the well-being of learners during the current crisis, governments and other key partners have an ongoing duty of care to education personnel. Today, it's critical that we take stock of their experience and learn from the crisis how we can better support education personnel in the future. At a time when expectations on teachers are sky high, my hope is that this strategic debate, our dialogue together, will help us understand both the threats and the opportunities arising from this crisis for the education workforce. And we hope to better understand the longer-term implications and the lessons for policymakers and education planners. I'm looking forward to a great discussion and debate, and I thank all the panelists for being with us and for sharing their insights and their experiences. It's a pleasure now to turn it over to my colleague, Barbara Tournier. Barbara.
Hello, and thank you, Suzanne, for your introduction. I'm Barbara Tournier, Program Specialist in the Research and Development team, where I work on teacher issues. So it is my pleasure to moderate this debate on teachers and more broadly on the education workforce in relation to the current crisis. The last debate, the last strategic debate that we held was on higher education. So today we'll be focusing more on the school level. With regards to the education workforce, we're not yet able to assess the full impact of the crisis. It will be a few years down the line before all research results are available and we can really assess the full magnitude of the effects of this pandemic on the education workforce. But for now, we have quite a lot of information on the short-term impact. We know that at the height of school closures, across the globe, 90% of teachers were no longer in schools. We also know that school closures affected education personnel in different ways. For those who continued working, educators described immense challenges and exhaustion, including emotional fatigue. Others lost their livelihood from one day to the next and had to cope for months before getting their jobs back. Holding these debates is critical so that we can take stock and so that policymakers and educators can learn from what has been happening in other countries. It's all the more important as our national news and broadcasts focus on what was happening in our own contexts and making it therefore very difficult to get a global perspective. The pandemic hit a profession that was already facing important challenges in terms of the appeal of the profession, in terms of teacher training and looming teacher shortages worldwide. Will those challenges be exacerbated? And what needs to change for the education workforce to be better prepared and supported during crisis? It is time that we ask ourselves those questions. I have the pleasure of introducing our fantastic panelists who will help to shed some light on those questions. They all bring different perspectives and each have a unique and valuable experience to share. So the first panelist, our first panelist is David Edwards. And David is the General Secretary of Education International, a federation of 32.5 million teachers and other educators affiliated with unions and associations in 173 countries globally. David leads the organization since 2018, after 7 years as the Deputy General Secretary directing education policy, advocacy, research, and communications. So David will help us to understand what happened globally with regards to the education workforce and why teachers need to be more involved in policy dialogues, in particular in relation to schools reopening. Mrs. Quinita Walrond-Lewis is joining us from Guyana. She was appointed Director of the National Center for Educational Resource Development in Guyana last October. And this center is responsible for professional development and capacity building for teachers who are in service. The center is also responsible for curriculum development and revisions. Previously, she occupied various education leadership positions and has worked with the Ministry of Education to action positive change and development across pre-primary, primary, and secondary. So we will benefit from her insights on how Guyana adapted its teacher training and its curriculum in response to the pandemic. We also have Mrs. Swarnali Das. Mrs. Das is a program manager with STIR Education in Delhi, India. She works closely with government officials in the District Institute of Education and Training on the Teacher Development Coordinator Program. Prior to this, she also worked as a master trainer and program leader with the Pratham Foundation in India. So Mrs. Das will also be sharing her insights on the measures that they put in place to support teachers during this crisis. And next we have Mr. Motiram Fuyal joining us from Nepal. Mr. Fuyal is the Senior Vice President at the Institutional School Teachers Union in Nepal. And this teachers union brings together teachers from the private sector. And he is also the principal of a private school and has been teaching science and environment for over 30 years. We know that teachers have been especially hard hit during this pandemic. So it was very important to get insights from the private teachers themselves. So Mr. Fuyal will share insights with regards to what happened to private teachers in Nepal. I'd like to welcome our audience who have joined us from across the world, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today. A few words about the format of the debate. We'll start with very short introductions from the panelists, and then we will move into a discussion format. We'll be discussing several themes. We'll start by briefly talking about the current state of teachers, and then we'll go into more depths about the measures put in place to support them, what happened to the private teachers, what's going on in terms of school reopening, and to finish off, reflections on the future of the profession and policy implications. There'll be around 30 minutes at the end for question and answers coming from the audience. The audience can interact through the chat function, and we've deliberately left that open so that you can interact amongst yourselves and you can share resources if you have some to share. We'll also be collecting the questions for the Q&A session from the chat function. Also for the interpretation, please note that you have interpretation in French and English. You can switch languages by just clicking on the globe that is at the bottom of the screen. The debate is being recorded in English and French and will be available on IIEP's YouTube channel later on. And I should mention that it is also being live streamed on YouTube and Twitter. So it's available on live stream on Twitter in English and on YouTube in French and English. So that's all in terms of housekeeping. Now let's move on to the debate. Let me turn to our speakers to give a brief introduction as to the situation in their context. I've asked each of our panelists to give a very brief overview in terms of what's the situation in their context with regards to school closures. Are schools still closed? Are they reopening? Or if they're open, when did they reopen? Some indications of how the pandemic affected the workforce in their context, and how the pandemic affected their work and what responses they put in place. I will first off ask David Edwards from Education International to share with us some more global insights, information that they have been able to collect through their affiliates. So let me just share my screen. All right, I think you can all see it now. So David, would you like to start us off?
Sure, and you have the slide that
Yes,
I sent. Okay.
the slide is showing.
Oh, good. Great. Well, thank you, Barbara, and greetings to everyone. My context is a little bit different from others who are going to be able to talk to you about sort of national jurisdictions directly. What we've done at Education International at the beginning of the pandemic was we surveyed our member organizations. We're actually currently surveying them again right now as part of our triennial Status of the World Teachers Report. So we're going through that data right now in terms of where we are actually right now. But let's just go back to the beginning of the pandemic. In the beginning, as you've said, it was we were all caught off guard. About 71% were teaching online, and about half of them, the teachers were reporting back that they were in regular contact with parents, but a large number of teachers were actually saying that they didn't know where many students were. So one of the main concerns that we were hearing from teachers' organizations was the impact the pandemic was having in terms of equity. We've said that we're all in the same storm. Here at EI, we say, but we're in different boats. And access to the technology, the inequalities was really pronounced. And we heard that many, many different ways. We also heard from our members that only about a quarter of them were saying that they felt they were getting the support necessary, whether that was in terms of the tools to be able to teach distance education. And some were actually driving to Starbucks parking lots in countries that had that ability. Others were having to sort of travel by bicycle into rural areas. But the fact was, a lot of them felt that they were left to their own devices to deal with that. In terms of the impact on employment conditions, that's where it's been very pronounced, and we've seen wide variations in terms of the impact. About half of the respondents reported that the employment conditions on part-time teachers and those that we call contract teachers were affected. And there were specific groups that I'm sure we'll be able to talk about as the debate goes on that were really heavily impacted. Education workers in private schools, private institutions, right across the board were the ones that those schools were shuttered immediately. And as you'll hear, many of those teachers were not paid. Higher education, particularly higher education that was private higher education and dependent on international students, were quite impacted. Substitute supply teachers, and of course, early childhood education was impacted massively. That's not a surprise though, too, because these are some of the most casualized and privatized of teachers, and immigrant teachers. Many of the stories we heard about immigrant teachers, migrant teachers being trapped, trying to get home, not actually having the support to be able to do that or to teach, and kind of being trapped in the middle was something that we hadn't necessarily anticipated, but we saw that come up in a lot of the data as well. So this is just an overview, but just to say that all teachers were impacted in some ways. And I think that we start to call compassion fatigue is something that we can get into that a little bit more, that many of the teachers have been experiencing regardless of the jurisdiction where they're working.
All right, thank you very much, David, for this overview. Quenita, can we hear what's been happening in Guyana? I'm going to share your slide. Quenita, are you here? Quenita?
Oh, I was on mute.
Okay, no worries. Okay, yes, so we're looking forward to hearing what's happening, what's been happening in Guyana.
Well, in Guyana, schools have been shuttered since March of 2020. And so we are almost at the precipice of a year of school closures. Guyana has some unique issues around its geography, equity, and access to technology. There are a lot of inter and intra-regional specificities that we have been struggling with a little to come to grips with in terms of being able to provision all of the necessary resources. But I mean, COVID has taught us how to be very adaptable. And though school has officially reopened since September of 2020, only a very small percentage of our students, those who are preparing to sit our matriculation exams at the end of the secondary cycle, are back in face-to-face or mixed modality learning. But all of our nursery or the kindergarten equivalent and our primary or elementary equivalent in some contexts, pupils have not returned to school. They are encountering either online instruction, some mixed modalities, but the ministry's position has been, we need to find a way to provide an equitable service. So we have been trying to provide also paper-based resources to help with the continuity of learning. Educators, of course, like the population, because teachers are people too, have had to struggle with making very critical decisions about how they resource themselves as educators to provide a service, as well as themselves as parents. How do they make decisions about who gets the laptop today, or how many hours can someone spend paying for internet, or trying to find a hotspot so that they could provide that kind of service? The National Center for Educational Resource Development, of course, the response falls almost squarely in our wheelhouse. And how do we help our teachers respond or adapt has caused us to think very critically and creatively as well. Through our Guyana Learning channel, we are able to beam lessons into people's homes via television. We also have our radio broadcast to schools that we're trying to tap into to better service those who have radio in places where there is no access to connectivity for the internet. So we're trying a plethora of options to help to reach our teachers and our students and families.
All right, thank you very much, Quenita. I'll now hand it over to Swarnali to hear what's been happening in Delhi, India. Swarnali, are you here?
Yes, I am here. Sorry, my video got off. Yeah, so thank you. So here in Delhi, schools were closed from the in the first week of March, when in rest of the India schools were still opened. Whereas as soon as the lockdown was announced on 21st March 2020, all the schools across the country were closed down. Schools in Delhi reopened on 18 January 2021 in phased manner to keep into mind the social distancing of children and safety measures of teachers as well. So for 10th and 12th, since they are the board classes, the schools reopened on 18 Jan and all the teachers started coming regularly. From 5th February 2021 onwards, school was opened for 9th and 11th classes with all precautionary measures taken by the school authorities. But here, the attendance of the children is not at all compulsory. They are coming to school based on the consent given by the parents. And it has also been decided that there will be no more than 20 children in each class. So children are coming on rotational basis. Teachers are yet to fix the timetable with the name of students, how they are going to come. So they are trying to devise these strategies to for this. Also, since all children are not coming on a single day, teachers are recording the classes in the form of audio or video, or taking down notes and trying to disseminate the information with the help of other children who have formed WhatsApp groups, so that the children who are not in school can also benefit and have access to what was learned that day. So teachers are opting for a semi-online mode of teaching for 9 to 12 classes right now. And for 6 to 8, the online teaching is still going on with the help of worksheets through WhatsApp and other forums. Delhi government, when the lockdown was announced in the initial months, 3-4 months, there was huge problem of migrant workforce, daily wages. They lost their jobs, they lost their homes. At that time, Delhi government converted approx 568 schools into hunger relief centers, apart from other community centers which were made relief centers, and teachers were engaged in food distribution process. Secondly, Delhi government also announced provision of dry ration for students for 6 months under the midday meal scheme, since children were not able to come to school but they needed food at home back. So teachers literally emerged, showed resilience, and they emerged as one of the strongest workforce. They played pivotal role in multiple ways. They emerged as COVID-19 warriors. They played role in food distribution process. They worked day and night, going beyond their traditional working hours, and they remained and stayed connected with children and students through online teaching classes or semi-online mode of teaching, and also provided them emotional support. All our sessions, meetings, orientations by the department were organized on online forums. Government was quick to switch from physical mode to online mode and adapt to the changes. Central and state governments immediately plunged in and encouraged educators to create online content, virtual capacity building sessions, and exposures at global level. So the children coming to government schools are not left out. And Delhi government teachers, since now the vaccination drive has started, Delhi government has announced that the teachers will be prioritized as frontline workers, especially those who are on COVID-19 duty and vaccinated on priority. So majorly what Delhi witnessed, the rest of the India also witnessed similar kind of situation. But since I'm working closely with Delhi, I prefer to say more about it specifically. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Swarnali. And now from our last speaker, Motiram, are you here?
Yeah, I'm listening.
All right. Can you tell us about what happened in Nepal, especially with regards to the private teachers?
Yeah, I think I have to focus most especially on private school teachers. Especially what is given task to me. I basically focus on these all. Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank you, Barbara, and other teams there from IIT. First of all, not going through a detailed study, we are just going to focus on some points. In Nepal, there are at about 27% schools, 29% schools are private school. And then I've already provided the data there also. And then out of these private schools, when they just faced lockdown and the school closure in March, beginning of the March, And then all the students and teachers remained constant in their house, and no educational activities were carried out. And then onwards, it was just in the right time that the academic session was about to finish and new academic session was about to start. And at the same time, there was some confusion among schools and among working forces there what to do next. But government also was not directly giving the directions and instructions what to do next. In some schools, there were no even final examinations held. But especially whenever I need to focus on workforce in private schools, after the lockdown, they needed to prepare the school examination result, and they had to provide it to some schools. And most of the schools were instructed to finish their examinations, and teachers remain workless for the first month of lockdown. And from second month, most of the private schools, if I say schools, private schools in Nepal, which are located in urban areas, they started online teaching. And it was quite clear that most of the teachers who were teaching or were still teaching in private schools, they were not technologically literate, or they were not quite familiar with whatever apps we are using right now, Team, Meet, and other apps. But at the same time, after 2-3 months of lockdown or school closure, our organization started in cooperation and from support from Education International to train them, to make them literate about technology. And then teachers were forced to work from their home to teach their students. And at the same time, they were not provided salaries and even a single payment, except certain schools. Most of the schools and majority of the schools did not provide salary to their teachers. And this was how the condition going forward, and teachers were suffering from economic crisis, and students were constrained to their home, and only educational activities were carried out through these online classes, and that were not comparatively very much effective. And whenever the schools just went on to be closer, and at the end of the September, all the schools opened, and from that day onwards, the regular teaching learning activities is going on. This is what till present. I think this introductory my words may be sufficient. If there will be any questions, I will answer it, and I'll be very glad to satisfy your curiosity. Thank you, Barbara.
All right, thank you very much, Mutiram. So we understand that in the private sector, teachers have not been receiving full pay or have not been paid at all. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and we'll move into the discussion. So maybe to get started, I have a question for all the speakers. We know that teachers have had a very difficult year. From the onset, they were immediately tasked with implementing distance learning modalities, often without guidance, training or resources, and they had to cope with increased workloads and family responsibilities. And now that schools have reopened in most parts of the globe, they face the challenge of working in a complex sanitary context with the fear of being exposed to the virus. And in different places, teachers report a huge emotional and physical fatigue. So my question to all the panelists is if you can just in a couple of words, give us the feeling or temperature of how teachers are faring in your context at the moment, nearly 1 year on after the school closures. Do you feel that teachers have been put under a lot of pressure? And maybe I will ask this question first to Quinita.
Thank you, Barbara. Now, in Guyana's context, um, our public school teachers have been receiving their pay, fortunately. So that's a matter of the public good. Um, and in terms of feeling pressure to perform, well, there has been pressure for them to upskill themselves. We're learning to do distance education through online modalities are concerned. There has been, especially for our teachers of classes who are matriculating into the next cycle. So for example, our grade 6 children who are preparing for secondary, and we have national placement exams that are relatively high stakes for our pupils and families. Those teachers who carry those classes are very concerned about being able to prepare their students adequately. The same can be said for our grade 10, 11, and 12 students who have to sit their matriculation exams to exit the secondary school cycle. So, and those exams are regionally derived. So it's the same exam that's taken across the Caribbean region. So there is pressure there for school-based assessments to be completed, for the students to be adequately prepared, because invariably this could predict or determine some of their life outcomes. So from that perspective, teachers do feel pressure to perform. And I think also from a human good perspective, being an educator is a calling. So when you're unable to reach your children to the fullest potential that you think possible, it is a space and place of frustration.
Thank you very, very much, Kunita. Swarnali, how are teachers feeling in Delhi at the moment?
Yes, so basically here in India, not only in Delhi but across the country, we faced with three challenges. One was health crisis, of course, and followed by food crisis because of the migration of the laborers' daily wages. Huge migration across the country, and particularly in Delhi, because Delhi is surrounded by multiple states, and people come from other states to Delhi for their livelihood, and they are majorly daily wages who are flocking to Delhi. So children come from that kind of background. So, and the third was educational crisis. So now the teachers were actually everywhere. As I said, they emerged as the most strong and one of the most powerful human resource for the government and for the whole society. Teachers were not only allotted duties at hunger relief centers. The schools are converted into hunger relief centers. They were in food distribution process. Teachers were given COVID-19 duties, and along with this, they were also conducting online classes. Teachers having COVID-19 duties were exempted technically from online teaching, but they were so dedicated that they did not want their children to miss out from the learning process, and they continued to upload their videos and teaching learning materials along with the other duties that they have been allotted with. uh, s- uh, they also try to adapt to the demands and changing times, adapt to technology, learning new ways and exploring various technological forums to help out their children, reach out to them. So, and even now, when the schools have reopened, we have heard stories from teachers that they're trying to adjust to the normal situation. Again, they're happy to come back to the classes to face their children and teach them again in physically. But since all the children are not coming, they're trying to devise strategies and thinking out of the box to reach out to those who are not coming on alternate days to schools. So there is a mixed kind of feeling and emotions, and some deaths were also reported sadly while teachers were on duty. Some teachers shared that they lost their family members while they were on duty themselves. So there was a huge sacrifice, struggle, physical and emotional stress. It's not very easy to comprehend at the moment what the teachers are actually going on, but there's really need to continue the emotional support to them in the coming days.
Yeah. So we can really see why we're talking about frontline workers here. Motiram, how are teachers feeling in Nepal?
Yeah, about the teachers faring in Nepal during those closure times. First of all, I have to tell you about some schools and some more schools because there are at about 10,000 private schools in Nepal. The data has not been actually received according to government. The number is a little bit lower than this. According to the private school or owners, the data may go somewhat high. But actually, those teachers not did not get salary in some schools before the pandemic period also. There were 1 or 2 months about to give their salaries, or 2 months and some more than 1 month. At the right time, there was a closure. And due to the condition of closures, some schools did not even provide the salary from before March. And after March, most of the schools did not provide any payment to their teachers since there were no classes for the first lockdown period month. And from second or third period months, it was just noted very clearly that we were in connection throughout the Nepal teachers, all teachers from all Nepal parts. That means most of the schools did not provide their salary and they started online classes. And due course of their online classes also, one example is that if a school did have 20 number of teachers, they manage their online classes maximum by 4 number of teachers because other 16 number of teachers were just considered as they were not in job. Means at the same time, teachers lost their job, means they were facing not only the problem of job, losing job, not only the problem of economic crisis, not only the problem of uncertainty, like so means in the beginning months, they might be, they just were saved or they were just living on the basis of their savings. And from second month or third month onwards, they were just asking for loans with their friends, with cooperatives and with other financial institutions. And from third or fourth month, means some teachers really changed their jobs. But whenever we were asking these conditions with owners organization, in the same meantime, means they were saying or they were just means feeling forced that we just forced as union to provide their payment at least to make teachers survive. And some schools started or paying a little bit amount just to make teachers survive. Means just for we better to say dalbat means morning and evening meals. Yeah. But some other type of payments were not there. Due to this reason, some teachers changed their jobs and we have found lots of teachers as street vendors. Means they started selling even sometimes face masks, like so other materials in the street. Means those conditions were very much difficult and teachers were surviving in low quality life. That means after when the schools were starting means opening there, means there was opening in September, then afterwards means school fees payment is in rise or is in means noticed, and then they are just getting their payments but not in 100%, but some schools are providing less than 100%. Maybe from this month onwards they are getting their 100% salary and the condition has become normal. But one condition is there very means noticeable, is that most of the teachers, when they just try to come back to their school right now, the teachers face has been changed. Means in some schools a set of teachers means has been changed. Means they just publish their advertisement to recruit new teachers, means firing up the older teachers team, like so. Also this type of examples are there. Means this is the real conditions of private school teachers in Nepal. Okay, let me share other points afterwards.
Thank you very much, Mutya. We understand it's really been a question of survival for private teachers in Nepal, and we've heard similar reports from many countries and really terrible stories. of teachers having to cope. David, does that resonate with what you're hearing from your affiliates across the world?
Yeah, Barbara, it does. And one of the things, because Swanali was also talking about loss of life, and I think it's, when I took this job, when I was elected into the position, I never imagined that I would be spending a part of my day writing condolence letters to families of teachers that we've lost right around the world, taping videos or watching Zoom funerals of friends and colleagues who we've lost to the pandemic. And I just think it's really important to continue to keep a light on that, because teachers are teaching in a context of loss, and they are not immune to what other people are feeling. Teachers in many parts of the world are also feeling a lot of pressure economically because they're the main breadwinners, and because of the lockdowns, you would have seen a number of other sort of, whether those were businesses or other things, a lot of the other sources of income closed, and so it put additional pressure. On top of that, they had their own children at home, because teachers are parents. And I just think you can't sort of underscore enough how difficult this is, because it is a calling. They care about their colleagues, they care about their students, and they've been put into positions where they have to make very difficult decisions about their livelihoods and about their lives, their loved ones who might have comorbidities or other types of things that make it very dangerous for them to be teaching. And as others were saying, to try to upskill and do things that they never imagined or never had the training for. So working sort of peer-to-peer and trying to figure out ways of teaching online. And like we said, I saw in some of the chat, half the world doesn't have access to the internet, right? So I mean, and half of them don't have access to electricity. So there's some very different experiences, but I would say very clearly that pressure on teachers is very real, and all of the helplines, the support networks, and that just understanding of what teachers are going through helps in terms of bridging a lot of the misunderstandings and making sure that their voices are heard through dialogue and that their rights are being respected throughout this pandemic.
Okay, so this, thank you for reminding us how much teachers need to be supported in this period. I think we'll move on now to discuss the measures put in place to support teachers. And as you just said, teachers had to be very resourceful to ensure learning continuity for children, and they had to demonstrate a high level of creativity and innovation. So I'd like to take the opportunity now to share a short video that was produced as part of the Global Teaching Insights project. That's a joint OECD, UNESCO, and International Task Force on Teachers for Education 2030 initiative. And the project is supported by Teach for All. And they're collecting testimonies from teachers, school leaders, teacher educators across the globe about how they changed their teaching during COVID-19. You'll find the link to this initiative in the chat. And there are a couple of testimonies online at the moment, but I'm informed that 100 will soon be made available. So it's an interesting project because it provides a space, a platform where educators can share from from all corners of the world. So now we're going to listen to Louis, a high school teacher in the Philippines, who explains how the COVID-19 pandemic has challenged him and his colleagues to collaborate and innovate in their teaching practice. Let me share my screen. Why do I not see it? Just a second. Here we are.
Hello everyone, I'm Louis Dasas from the Philippines. I'm a high school teacher based in Manila. The COVID-19 pandemic has challenged teachers like me to innovate on my teaching practice. It's like I'm a beginning teacher all over again. I am immensely proud on how I collaborated with my peers in order to develop instructional materials for distance learning. We also innovated on curriculum delivery and implementation in order to address the digital divide that exists in my country. We prioritized learning outcomes and made content bite-sized for our students. We also took into consideration the varying learning situations that our students have in their homes. So with this, we thought of having the modules prepared, having both online and offline versions. In this way, all students can have equal access to the contents of the modules. Yes, the COVID-19 pandemic has its silver lining as it challenged schools to step up their game and innovate more. I learned that no technology can ever replace a passionate teacher. Yes, we may have these tools, but our passion for teaching transcends any technology. We should all be innovative at this time of a pandemic. Moving forward with and post COVID-19, all teachers must remember to be reflective. And as we reflect on our current practices, we must gain fundamental understanding on what truly matters. And what matters is student learning and student welfare. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Okay, so let me turn to Quinita and Swarnali. Does what this teacher talks about resonate with what happened in your context? And can you tell us a little bit about the measures that you put in place and the measures that you're most proud of? So maybe Quinita, can you start?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Barbara. The educator sharing really does resonate quite strongly with the situation on the ground with Guyana, especially where it comes to trying to make more equitable the access to education for students from our hinterland regions and when compared to those from our coastland regions. How Guyana is so structured is that the majority of the population is centered around the coastland, and the coast being the urban center as well, has the provisioning of all of the infrastructure around accessibility to the internet, to devices, and so on. And the hinterland and our remote riverine areas generally do not have the same measure of access to these resources. Where the secondary sector is concerned, we are exceedingly proud of the innovative steps that they have taken to try to link through technology smart classrooms where educators from areas that do have internet access and strong pedagogy where subject areas are concerned are able to beam their lessons into communities that are struggling in this regard. And the Ministry of Education has done so through provisioning or paying for mobile internet access for these smart hubs within different high schools so that the students can benefit, especially those that are in our dormitory schools and so on, so that their teaching learning cycle does not necessarily become so hindered. Also, we have, as a ministry, tried to up the capacity of our teachers when it comes to distance modality learning. We have embarked on the Profuturo platform, which makes, and it's actually now mandatory for all teachers within the sector, and it runs on an ICT and innovation route where they have to, well, where educators are taught how to use the devices available to them. So whether it's their smartphones, whether it's a tablet, in order to utilize it for the purpose of interactive teaching and learning, which has been a really great space for innovation. And for those educators who don't have access to the online platform, we've also converted the modules into paper-based modules so that those teachers from the hinterland who are also affected by the barrier to having access to the internet can so too find themselves prepared using the paper-based modules. So that innovation, it has been really a COVID blessing for us. And I guess a little while to come, we'll talk a little bit more about the curriculum approaches that we've also taken to try to be responsive to our learners. Thank you, Barbara.
I think, Punita, if you want to talk a little bit about the curriculum, you can do it now. Quinita? Quinita, do you want to talk a little bit about the curriculum? Well, maybe in the meantime, Swarnali, can you tell us how the measures that you've been putting in place and whether you feel that teachers have shown a growth mindset in learning and overcoming barriers?
Yes, definitely. In Delhi's context, teachers have literally demonstrated exemplary growth mindset. When the pandemic struck, it was like a very unpredictable situations with multiple challenges faced. And I have seen teachers literally going beyond their traditional working hours and reaching out to children even on phone, even those children who did not have smartphones. We did a survey in the month of March, April, with approx 7,021 teachers, which shows that more than 50% teachers shared that they were able to connect with 30 to 50% children, and with few children they were not able to connect with because they feared they had either migrated or they didn't have any kind of contact numbers. Teachers also struggled with getting numbers of children, which would frequently change because children would use multiple devices to connect with the teachers. Sometimes they will take a phone from their neighbors or aunts when if they are living in a joint family or close localities. Teachers tried to create a database. They formed WhatsApp group to connect at least 50 to 70% children, which whomsoever they could reach out. They took help of the SMC members, which constitutes parents and community members, to help them get the children and help them to connect with the children with their contact details. Other than this, mentor teachers, Delhi government has 200 mentor teachers. There are 26 in my district and 130 teacher development coordinators, one in each schools in my district, and more than 1,000 teacher development coordinators in rest of the Delhi. So they all show tremendous leadership in connecting all the teachers over phone, arranging online meetings, and we have this uh, uh, practice of having online monthly meetings with teachers and co-learning sessions. So everything was just redesigned because they were all planned. The strategies were all planned before the pandemic struck. All the handouts were all ready. But then as soon as we realized the need of the hour has completely changed, so the demand was from the system officials to the NGO partners to switch from textbook content to focus more on social emotional well-being of teachers and children. So all the programs, teacher development coordinator program, cluster development leadership program, which includes the HS of the school, head of the schools, and happiness curriculum, everything started focusing on the social emotional well-being. So teachers and officials actually role modeled resilience. They hold meetings and they had reflections, sharings. They encourage children for active self-reflection. They started having certificate program for their children. Government had certificate program for the teachers to acknowledge and recognize their efforts, to appreciate their efforts and their innovations. And as Quenta said, many schools adopted this semi-online mode and offline mode. The content, online teaching content, along with the strategies on social emotional well-beings in later months, from the month of May, June, teachers started creating online teaching materials and uploading it on Diksha portal, which was a central government initiative. E-Vidya scheme was also launched. So the teachers tried to have worksheets in hand, and if parents came to school, teachers would hand over the worksheet to them. Those schools were closed from the month of June when lockdown was over. Schools reopened, but only for very few teachers. Very few. I think from the month of November onwards, teachers started actually coming to school. So from then onwards, they started giving worksheet to the parents who could come to school and collect them, maintaining the social distancing and safety measures. So, and those who could not come, they would just share it on WhatsApp. So creating WhatsApp group, asking children to collaborate with each other. Collaboration was also one of the practices we did to ensure social emotional well-being of each other. Teacher collaboration, teacher student collaboration, and student student collaboration, and teachers collaboration with the system officials, with the education department. So we felt that appreciation culture, resilience, collaboration, all these practices were earlier also in place. But now teachers were more talking about the active self-reflection things. They are talking about their emotional well-beings, which was not very usual in Indian context. We are more on the textbook curriculum. So that is a huge shift, a paradigm shift in the mindset, in the perspective of how we are looking at things. And many teachers shared that they feel like how lifelong learning components is so important, and they felt we all are like lifelong learners and trying to thrive into the world of unknown and learning from each other. Many teachers learn technology from their kids at home, so it was like a two-way communication and learning process that was going on, and many multiple innovations were done, and teachers had the autonomy. That was the best part. I felt that government and education department gave them full autonomy, that the way they want they can reach out to the children, either through WhatsApp, either through call, or through mixed blended learning. Sometimes they would be sending audio messages because videos take more internet and children don't have that money. So irrespective of huge challenges, digital divide, because children didn't have access to internet and smartphones, still teachers tried their best to reach out to them. That's what we felt, that this is something that they tried to sustain the momentum of learning, and they started talking about stress management, emotions, grounding techniques to keep their morale high, and as well as their children who really needed their teachers at this critical situations, because children in India were also facing with the problem of food crisis. So teachers in one school shared that they literally contributed money and they bought smartphones and gave it to the children at their own expense. Many teachers distributed food to the children. They went home, they did home visit on their own other than the government duties. So teachers went out of their way to reach out to the kids, and I felt that system officials also supported the teachers in all possible ways that they could, by hand holding them, by organizing capacity building sessions, orientation sessions on technology, and just understanding the need and be with them. So I felt these were a lot of things that we learned from the crisis.
Thank you, Swanali. It's really heartwarming to listen to you and to hear about all the collaboration and the support that has been going on, and how mindsets are shifting as a result. So just to clarify, we are talking in your case about the teachers that are on the government payroll, and not touching on the private teachers, what happened to private teachers in India. Quinita, would you like to share about the curriculum changes you made to the curriculum in Guyana?
Sure. Thank you again, Barbara, and I apologize for the technological hiccups. So you see that even on the coast, in the center, we do have issues with connectivity as well. I was actually going to not chance the video, but I'll go and speak quickly. For the curriculum, we have undergone a consolidation process where we look at the grade level expectations, so the enduring understandings that the children are supposed to have at the completion of a particular grade. And our curriculum of itself is spiraling in nature. so that there are enduring trends that repeat themselves from year to year, just more advanced in a more developmentally appropriate manner and trajectory. So with the consolidated curriculum, we've been able to truncate a typical school year that would last from 37 to 38 weeks into coverage over a 20-week period, so that it now provides a stabilizing basis for teaching and learning for the novice teacher, and even the more seasoned educator could be supported in this way, so that the educator is not guessing or floundering, what should we teach at this grade level, or what should we teach in this particular period and season. So it's something that we have innovated around. It's something that we are attempting. Of course, when it becomes available, we can give you some more data and feedback as to how it's working. But for now, we find that it is a really good way to answer that equity question, because of course, not all teachers have access to the same measure of resourcing across the country. And we really don't want to forget or disenfranchise children that are in some of our most needy pockets. So that is one of the cool innovation things that we are trying here at the Ministry of Education in Guyana.
Thank you, Quinita. And I'm sure that our attendees would love to have those resources available. I can see that there's a lot of action going on in the chat and lots of questions for the panelists. So I'm going to move forward as time is running to talk about now, back to what happened to the private teachers and the most vulnerable, within the broader education workforce. David, in his introduction, mentioned that the pandemic had varying impacts on the employment and salaries, and the data that is available so far suggests that only a minority of countries did not pay governments that were on the teachers that were not on the government payroll. So it was mostly those in the private and informal sector that have been affected in terms of their pay. In the survey that was conducted by Education International amongst their unions, about 2/3 reported that education workers in private institutions were significantly affected, with teachers on temporary contracts and support personnel were the most affected. So Motiram has already been giving us some insights into what happened in Nepal and how teachers had to cope without a salary. Motiram, can you tell us now, how did private teachers react? What was their response, and what measures could be put in place to help private school teachers during the crisis and to avoid the same situation in future?
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Yeah, what happened and what efforts we just put to make private teachers survive during the pandemics? I want to categorize it into two points. First one is individual efforts, and second one is institutional or organizational efforts. First of all, those teachers who did have very much command over their profession in some schools, they could meet their owners or their boss to ask for their salary, at least to have some payments during lockdown. And organizationally, our organization conducted many more meetings with owners, with government officials, and some other teachers unions who are working, especially focusing on government schools. Since in comparison to government teachers, we are not getting any salaries. Government teachers were getting salaries regularly from government. It was not focused, or it is better not to be focused on such matters. And in that case, teachers who did have individual efforts and who did have individual strength to bargain, to discuss with their owners, they could at least get some payment and they could survive on this or that type of payments, though it was quite a little bit. And for other teachers whom we have to represent, we represented their voices to owners, we represented or we raised their voices, we lobbied with governments, officials and other organizations, and we sat for the discussions with such organizations, owners. Means we asked owners at least to provide their survival. And we asked owners, they have to provide their full salary, that is the teacher's right. But their conditions, according to them, was not so much good because guardians, parents were not paying fees. And that's why also they were just they were just coming in compromise to provide their teacher's salary, but in practice it was not happened. So we just did that way, and then I've already told that teachers were compelled or forced to change their profession. Teachers were forced to survive on low food. Teachers were forced to go to villages. Teachers were forced to do another type of works. Like so means during online classes also, according to our reports, only 50% students were present during online classes. Online classes were not of the same time duration. Means in a day in Nepal, we teach 8 periods, 6 to 8 periods in the private schools. And during online classes, a teacher needed to teach only 2 periods a day, like so and so. That's why that affects directly to the payment of the teachers. And that was the condition. And there was one report also in far west Nepal, one teacher committed suicide due to this crisis. Must basically or must probably that was happened there. We had such notices there, and we had found some teachers lost their mental balance also. That was there, but right now we are getting some other type of reports too. It may be said later on because we are given some task to discuss a little bit or step by step. So, and then another thing is there, for another step of the question is there, means what measures could be done, or what measures can be done right now also. We were also lobbying, and we were sitting in the discussions. We raised a voice to make at least an emergency type of fund to support teachers who are working in private schools, or if this type of conditions will be appeared in future. Means government and owners organization together with the teachers organization should form an emergency fund to support teachers in such critical conditions. One is there, and we forced government also to develop some legal provisions so that each and every school should form such type of fund to support their teachers in crisis. And another thing is that we are also forcing, we are raising this voice. One is that means every school should provide the teachers at least their basic rights. Means they should deduct some fund and add some other fund to put it in their provident fund, because government has one system there to put teachers provident fund in government trust, so that the teachers can get some back in the form of loan also after their retirement also. But this system is not in practical implementation, so that teachers have to face such type of problems presently also, and in past also they faced it. Means they are undergoing very critical and severe conditions of living. That is the conditions, and the government and teachers together with the owners should form a very strong fund to support teachers in such conditions if it appears in future. That is what very strong and very practical recommendations we made with government officials also and with private owners also. Thank you, Barbara. I think I may satisfy your question there.
Thank you, Motiram. And again, it's quite tragic stories emerging from Nepal. And so from the discussions that we've had with Motiram and from what he's just outlined here, the private sector has made revendications to the government, and they're still in discussion. So far, these revendications have not been met with success, and there has not been any form of help provided to private teachers. Now, we know that in some countries, the government has come to help the private sector, and in other countries, governments have decided not to. And so this is a difficult question, one that I've difficulty answering, and I'm going to turn to David to help us with this. We know that governments have a duty of care to their education personnel, but how far does this duty of care extend? To the extent that the private sector is largely unregulated in many contexts, should governments protect private teachers more than other workers in other sectors of the economy? And where do we draw the line? I've been thinking about this, and I think it's really important that governments do step up to help the private sector, because the private sector, or we know that around the world, around 20 to 30% of children are enrolled in non-government schools. So aside from the human impact on teachers, if private schools close, a substantial proportion of pupils are going to be out of school and coming into public schools that are often already overcrowded, and creating additional stress for teachers that are in government schools. So that's the reality, and we've been hearing that is happening in a number of countries, and it's all the more important because the majority of these private schools are catering for children from low socioeconomic backgrounds. So it's not at all elite schools. It's really catering to a significant proportion of the poorest pupils. In India, 50% of children are in private schools, and in Kampala in Uganda, it's 84%, and in Nairobi, Kenya, it's 60%. So how do you deal with that? And where does your duty of how far does your duty of care extend? David, can you share some insights on this?
Thanks, Barbara. I think this could have a longer conversation in and of itself, but I think a couple of things, and I think we need to separate a couple of issues here. So first of all, in terms of duty of care, the right to education, every single country that's signed on to SDG 4, to the Incheon Declaration, to Education 2030, have an obligation in there under the indicator, the teacher indicator, in terms of their rights, their political and economic rights. That's just, they have that obligation. Some have chosen to outsource that, but they are still, according to the international recommendations on the status of the teaching profession, UNESCO and ILO 1966, very clear responsibilities there. I think that what we are seeing now is, I don't want to say coming home to roost, but systems do what they're designed to do, right? And systems that are built on a model of precarity and fragility, where they need to return on investment, a profit margin in the private education that tends to come off of teachers' salaries and rights, is where that profit margin comes from. So that's one sort of larger issue around the decisions, and for poor families, once it's no longer profitable, then they can close those schools, and those children, like you say, are out. Now, on the other side, in terms of employment, social protection in countries where people lose their jobs as a result of the pandemic is something that's absolutely fundamental. And those of us in the global labor movement and human rights movements and others fight very strongly to make sure that whether you're a private school teacher, whether you're in whatever job you have, if you lose your employment, You should have unemployment insurance, you should have social protection, you should have health, you should have all these kinds of supports. That's not what's obviously happening, and particularly in those jurisdictions that have these sort of low fee for profit private school chains in particular, who are profit driven, and we're very amongst the first to close the doors and to fire their generally unqualified teachers, who tend to also be teachers who are paid less, who are supported less, who do not have the same qualifications, generally don't have the same. Now, Moti and in Nepal, you have labor rights, you have an organization to defend those rights. And the fact what he was saying was, and you heard this from others, is that many teachers have dug into their own pockets to help each other out. I think in the short term, there needs to be work done, whether you're a private school teacher or a bus driver or a food service worker or whatever who's lost. But I think there, in the more longer term, and now I'm speaking to you IEP as education planners who have choices they can make around quote unquote innovations and systems. If you do not want to have fragile, precarious systems, then you might not want to build those systems where they can topple over quite so easily in the face of pandemics like these. And you might want to have a reassessment of the way in which you build those systems to ensure that poor families and teachers have educational continuity in times of natural disasters and pandemics like this. Not easy. We could have a longer conversation about it, but I really think it's important, and I commend Moti and many others who are taking on employers who don't feel that they have the same accountability that a government does to its citizens. I think it's a different power relationship, but I think they're very brave in what we support them, of course.
Barbara, you're on mute. Sorry. Okay. I was just thinking, saying thank you very much to David for his insights on this question, and that indeed we could spend a lot more time discussing this and implications for the future of education and how we need to make education systems more resilient to such crises. Well, we're going to move on to the last theme.
Oui, bonjour. Je souhaiterais parler avec Monsieur Chevrier, c'est vous?
I think.
Bonjour.
Amaranta, I think
Amaranta Hilaire. Je vous ai appelé la
Amaranta,
dernière.
you're not on mute.
Mon surnom parce que j'avais envoyé décembre dernier, enfin l'année dernière, une
Amaranta
pour être exonérée du CFE. Je suis auto-entrepreneur, je suis prof de yoga, je donne des cours en ligne chez moi. Voilà, donc
Amaranta?
vous m'avez répondu comme quoi, malheureusement, je ne pouvais pas être exonérée.
Are you all hearing? Thank you.
Tout à fait, je vous ai fait un mail, je ne sais pas si vous l'avez reçu tout de suite.
No, I cannot mute Amaranta. Amaranta, we can hear you.
J'ai même... D'accord, parce que même dans le sujet,
you might want to call her on the phone.
Monsieur Didier Chevrier, donc vous, et je vous ai mis l'article que j'avais trouvé comme quoi je suis bien exonérée autant en étant prof de yoga chez moi. C'est une activité sportive. Alors, je vous l'ai envoyé le 8, c'est le 8 qu'on a parlé, c'était le 8 février à 12h15.
Ok. Narit, is there any way that you can mute her mic?
Je suis en train de le faire là.
Okay, thank you. Okay, all right. Sorry about that. So I hope we've got the situation under control. That's what happens with.
D'accord, ok.
Oh no.
Okay. Très bien. Vous me répondez sur le même mail? Parce qu'en fait, je viens de recevoir aujourd'hui, vous m'avez envoyé un formulaire à remplir, le formulaire que j'avais déjà rempli, les cotisations foncières de santé. Ça marche. Bon, vous me répondez sur le mail. Alors, je vous remercie.
All right. So I think we can go back to the strategic debate now. So going to our last theme, on school reopening, teachers have been somehow criticized around the globe, or in some countries, for challenging in-person teaching and going back to schools without necessarily feeling that they have sufficient protection. David, can you tell us how, if you feel that teachers have been sufficiently involved in preparations for the reopening of schools?
All right. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Well, the short answer, Barbara, to your question is no. Okay. If you go globally, generally, sufficiently prepared. Have we seen good examples? What I would say is on the EI website, we have a report that we launched called Forward to School, where we looked at what was happening successfully or somewhat successfully, because when there's, like I talked about the loss of life and things like that, I do want to keep driving. We are in the midst of a health pandemic and crisis, so it's about mitigating risks. But we basically have come up with sort of a 5 pillars of those systems where we've seen somewhat smoother or smoother-ish versus absolute stalemates. And I think these are aligned with science. So this is also what we've gleaned from the World Health Organization, the technical advisory group that UNESCO and UNICEF has with the World Health Organization. One of them is dialogue. Yeah, one of them is engage in social and policy dialogue. Day 2 of the pandemic, in those countries that had institutional dialogue, take a Denmark or a Norway, those places were already sitting down at the table to talk about the collective agreement, how they were going to deal with, teachers who were feeling sick, showing symptoms, how was it a doctor's excuse, how they were going to deal working online in late nights, the parent issue. They were sort of solving problems. Other countries weren't. The other pillar that we saw that's really important in terms of as a determinant of success towards school reopenings is ensuring the health and safety of education communities. Because what you see in schools is very much what's happening in the communities outside. So the higher the transmission rates outside schools, the higher the transmission rates you're going to see inside of schools. So those communities and countries that aren't very serious about getting the pandemic under control. So doing those basic things is really, really important, we found, and having teachers involved in those conversations about what the science is saying at a given moment. That's also around protective equipment and access, but buildings that had no ventilation, overcrowded classrooms, no running water, and were being told to wash their hands and socially distance were, let's just say, not already starting on the right spot in terms of following the science. Another issue is making equity a top priority. We have a methodology called educational equity auditing that EI engages with member organizations are doing to look at the sort of equity implications of COVID in terms of not just student learning, but in terms of access, in terms of girls, in terms of rurality, in terms of special education needs, in terms of their tools, whether they're having to pay out of pocket or whether it's being provided. Another one we talked about for reopening is really having a support physical and emotional well-being and recovery, whether that's a hotline, whether that's a teacher support center, whether that's a variety of different psychosocial supports that are made available. That also is very helpful, and those systems that use that have higher trust and higher efficacy around at least getting to the point of opening. And the last one I would say is trust the professionalism of educators. The issue around professional autonomy that I think many of the other speakers have talked about and that we have seen is that you cannot script your way out of this. Okay, you cannot take people without any training who are volunteers for a short period of time and give them some kind of script that's going to work. You actually have to invest in their sort of pedagogical, their child development, their knowledge, their content knowledge, and you have to trust them. And you have to trust them to make pedagogical decisions in real time, given the situations and knowing their students and what they're going through, as traumatic as that is, and what their parents are going through. So trusting teachers is the other part. Those 5 pillars together have seen a much higher propensity for school systems to open and stay open. The DG Azulea and I put a video out about also vaccinating teachers as a priority, which is another demonstration of the trust and respect to the profession. But there's a lot of things that you can do. But yes, you're right. There's always this sort of tendency when things don't go well to try to find someone you can hang the blame on. But I think in those systems that don't take care of those 5 things, it's very hard to put on the teachers, and particularly after everyone, early on in the pandemic was applauding teachers and saying they should be paid more, and there's, superheroes. How quickly, if things don't go exactly right, that can change. And I think it's really important that we don't allow that sort of simplification and misinformation. I think following those 5 pillars gives them a much better chance to open schools successfully and safely. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, David. We'll move to the last theme for this debate, which is really future oriented and trying to draw the lessons and policy implications from what we've learned. We know that the pandemic is likely to is leading to an economic crisis, which is probably going to affect teachers in the long term in terms of the efforts that were made to revalorize the profession, and also in terms of potential salary freezes, which would be the last thing that we want. It is also potentially affecting teacher attrition. In the US, there's been a survey conducted by the largest teachers union that revealed that 28% of educators said the coronavirus had made them more likely to leave teaching or retire early. We don't yet know exactly what the impact will be, but I would like to hear from our speakers whether they feel that the crisis is having a negative effect on the appeal of the profession, or if it's not changed in terms of the appeal of the profession, and also what, from their perspective, do they feel are priority actions that they feel need to be undertaken for in order to avoid future crises. So maybe Quinita, can you share with us how you see the situation in Guyana and what needs to change in future?
Thank you, Barbara. Well, first and foremost, I think the government of Guyana has done a very good job in terms of trying to create safe and protective environments for the return to school. I mean, we have been in situations where our students have, and our educators do have to return to schools. We have been very vigilant about taking on board our teachers' general health and well-being as priorities in the process as well. So we have undertaken to provide personal care and protective packages for our educators. So once they have to return to that face-to-face space, I mean, we provide them with masks, shields, even immunity support and helplines for psychosocial support, and taken sanitization protocols and even the implementation of the UNICEF WASH program to heart in a lot of our education spaces. With respect to the maintenance of the draw to the profession, that is something that we have been seeking to increase within the education sector as an ongoing issue for us. Because in Guyana, unfortunately, some people believe that if you can't do, you teach. And for us, raising the profile of the profession has been of significance and tremendous importance. So much so that even in response to these virulent times, the Teachers College, our Seroquatic College of Education, has now moved to the online modality. So now again, is one of those COVID-19 blessings where persons from around the region and within the country now have increased access to the necessary training to become a competent and capable educator. So I think that that has been one of those COVID blessings for Guyana, because it now increases the profile of access to the teaching and learning profession. And you recognize that teachers are valued and valuable. We have a very active teachers union that constantly advocates for better working conditions for educators. So from that perspective, it is also seen as a more viable option for sustaining families and attracting more males to the profession, because it is highly female dominated in Guyana. And one of the, quite frankly, one of the reasons is that the males might not have seen it as much as they might have loved teaching or loved sharing in that way, as a way to support a family. So now, with the increased profile of the education fraternity or sorority, try to find a gender neutral term there, we feel like the profile and the level of attraction of the profession is indeed increasing. And there are moves in place to increase that draw. In terms of priority actions for us, one of the critical priority areas is trying to level the service provision playing field. So we are putting a lot of investment in training our educators to become proficient in distance modality interface and even being able to navigate the online space. Excuse me.
Bless you.
We are, thank you. We are also placing very high currency on remodeling and revamping our education spaces that make them more alive and interactive for that kind of child or student-centered teaching and learning experiences. We are trying to create more smart classrooms so that as we build the technological capacity of our teachers to meet the technological native mentality of our students, that we would see a better teaching and learning interaction and exchange. We are also heavily investing in ways that technology can become accessible offline, so that we are not dependent on the internet to have those kinds of teaching and learning experiences. So COVID really has leapfrogged our development where those things are concerned. So in large measure, as much as it is tragic nationally and internationally, there have been some really good blessings for us in the education sector. Thanks, Barbara.
Excellent. It's good to hear that it's had a positive effect in many ways. Swarnali, would you say it's the same in Delhi?
Yes, I would like to resonate with what Quentin and David just shared. Like, trusting the teachers is the most important part. But here I would also like to add that in Delhi government schools, we have the concept of guest teachers, which is at present not there elsewhere in the country. And guest teachers are different from contract teachers. And when the pandemic struck, the guest teachers were not paid anything from the month of May to October. So they really struggled a lot. Surviving themselves in a city like Delhi itself became a huge challenge for them. There were 20,000 guest teachers who went through this crisis. And thankfully, in the month of October, government announced that these teachers could be reinstated back based on their willingness to come back to these schools. And now, from the month of January onwards, all of them have been engaged again in the teaching learning activities. So teachers who are not even trained counselors, still they try to do telecounseling. They engage in online teaching, assessment processes. They tried everything with government supporting them. But there is now need in two ways that I see. One is digital readiness. So there is need to leverage the paradigm shift in the perspective towards education system, and teachers have started integrating technology in education and understood its needs. So let's sustain this learning process which had been initiated. and there is need for pedagogical understanding along with technological integration, because it's a kind of skill. So there is need to have capacity building sessions in future for the teachers to empower them to meet any such crisis, and don't leave this learning process or adapting to that mode or technology mode. Secondly, there is digital inequity, like huge gap, digital divide, as we can say, between children in rural areas, children in urban slums, and children going to private schools. So in order to bridge that gap, just like Motiramji earlier said, there is really need for the whole society to come together and collaborate, like system officials, NGO partners, along with corporates, and make technology and devices, internet accessible to the children who are coming from less privileged section of the society. There could be a well-equipped learning centers in each and every community, just like in Delhi we have mohalla clinics. In every locality there are clinics. Similarly, they can have such well-equipped, well-designed digital libraries or centers for such children who can have access to technology and internet if such crisis strikes again. And there could be like online availability of free internet, open internet, if children are not able to come out of their home, just like it happened in the lockdown. So bridging this digital divides is the need of the hour. Central government has done a very good, has come up with two schemes like Diksha portal and e-Vidya scheme to make contents available online, but it needs to be accessible to the marginalized and vulnerable children. And online content has to be inclusive in nature for visually and hearing impaired children. So there is really need to make the online process literally inclusive for all children across the country. And thirdly, to prepare ourselves better and well equip ourselves better in future, we need proper process to ensure social and job security for the guest teachers and contract teachers, also for the private school teachers who lost jobs because many private schools closed down, or they couldn't afford to pay teachers because there was no admission. In many cases, since parents lost their jobs, children started shifting from private or schools and colleges to government institutions. So that is another struggle that the private sector is right now facing: loss of jobs and loss of children, number of children getting enrolled in their schools. Other than this, I think that to bridge the digital divide and digital readiness are the two things that we really need to focus on to prepare ourselves better for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Swanali. We're going to turn to the audience now, as we're really running out of time, and there's been lots of questions put to the panelists. Just looking at them now, quite a few questions on the situation of private teachers, and also on the type of psychosocial support provided to teachers. So, and some on school opening as well. Maybe we can start with those on the psychosocial support. This is a question from Jamaica. And we have asking what type of psychosocial support has been tried in the discussed countries, and how did it go? And in Jamaica, they have been putting in place webinars and support groups in collaboration with UNICEF in the Return to Happiness program. Would anyone like to share maybe Swarnali about psychosocial support made available to teachers?
Yes, so as I earlier said, Teacher Development Coordinator Program has this monthly co-learning sessions. So the whole focus was shifted to having to design sessions to support teachers to provide social emotional support to the teachers, and they in turn can support their children back at home. So, Delhi government, along with experts in psychology, our district officials, they designed such sessions who had expertise in this area. So, we specially focused on resilience strategies. There were multiple strategies in resilience that we focused, and we continued to use those strategies in every sessions and every meetings. They became an integral part. There were a lot of reflections, sharings, and opportunities were created for teachers where they can freely share, engage them in open forum, and without any fear of being judged or rebuked. So that kind of trust the system tried to develop, and they did try to trust their teachers and make them feel that yes, we are there and we really trust you and you can free to share. We keep on reiterating that this is a difficult time and we don't have all the solutions, but we are all in together at the moment. There was active self-reflection strategy discussed with teachers, especially for the children. They used to give simple questions around emotions to the children and ask them to draw, reflect, write, whatever they want to do, and they can share it back to the teacher. If they don't feel free like sharing and keeping it to themselves, they're allowed to do that also. So there was a lot of autonomy given to teachers and to the kids for to ensure their social emotional well-being. That's what we tried here in Delhi. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe a question for David about the situation of private teachers. And the question is, what are the strategies for improving the living and working conditions of private teachers?
Thank you, Barbara. Well, the first answer is organized, the second answer is organized, and the third answer is organize. Sorry, but you can organize for your rights. And I think private teachers have political, social, and professional rights that need to be realized, but oftentimes with employers, they find themselves in situations of huge precarity. So I think that by joining with public sector unions and organizations, they will increase their bargaining power in order to see that happen. I think, there's the other issue, which is around for private school teachers, which is, they are in many places around the world treated as expendable. They're treated as a cog in a wheel, a cog in a moving part, not as professions. They're doing something and then they're driving a cab because they can't make ends meet. I think what we need to do is highlight that precarity, and we need to put it into the context both of human and labor rights, but also in terms of what's it going to be like for the learning of students who've had a teacher that isn't being paid, who can't feed their family, who has to work extra jobs. What is that impact going to be? And so in the short term, I think that we need to put a lot of pressure on governments to step in and support these teachers. And I think that social safety nets and social protection schemes and things like that need to be done. But I think long term, it's by design. The precarity, the low wages, the low prestige is by design in order to create some sort of profit margins for investors. And if that is the organizing principle, we have to tackle it at its core.
Thank you. Maybe a question to Quinita. If you could throw more light on how the paper-based model is operationalized for teachers in the hinterland. What measures are being used to meet up the lost time, since not all children had access to technology, to meet up the lost time with regards to the curriculum?
Okay, so in terms of the paper-based training for the educators, what we've done is taken the digital material for the professional courses across the 3 levels, the basic, intermediate, and advanced. And we've actually painstakingly gone through the process of printing, binding, and collating all of the slides from the different training courses and undertaken the expense of printing them and then have them distributed at the regional and sub-regional level through the district education offices, because education delivery is somewhat decentralized in Guyana. Certainly there's the main Ministry of Education hub within the city center, but within every education district, there is an education hub there. So the distribution process is done through the officers of those regional education hubs. And so this allows access to the information without having access to online capability. So certainly you will find persons having smartphones or smart devices that are not necessarily, I guess, so smart because they don't have access to the internet, but they can certainly utilize the devices for showing children how to do video diaries or taking photographic logs, and to show and demonstrate their understanding in new and innovative ways, which would have been outside of the realm of experience prior to this particular training. In terms of, Barbara, can you remind me of the second part of your question, please?
Yes, it was, how do you make up for the lost time? Since not all children have access to technology. But I think
this is the magic question. Yes, this is the magic question and magic formula that we are trying to answer and find. So this is why we actually conceptualize the consolidated curriculum, so that regardless of where, because the exit point when the pandemic began was not similar or stagnant across the entire education sector. So we can't say that in March, all children stopped at term 2, week 3 of any kind of subject area. So even as we consider reopening or not reopening based on guidance from the Ministry of Public Health, by having this 20-week curricula prepared, regardless of where teachers ended, they can find a point of re-entry. Or if they find that students have not had any contact whatsoever with any kind of teaching and learning, there is still space for them to be able to cover the necessary content at that grade level. So, I mean, please join us in keeping our fingers, toes, and eyes crossed that this will make the difference that our learners need. And I mean, just to add that, again, based on the inter and intra-regional specificities of the pandemic and access to resources, there are pockets of the country where persons remain unaffected by COVID-19 within those communities. So, I mean, of course, respecting social distance guidelines by the Ministry of Public Health, there is still that opportunity to interact with our students in different ways. And I hope that sheds some light on our situation here.
Thank you. Now, maybe 2 more questions. One on teacher motivation. Question coming from Uganda. In Uganda, some teachers have learned additional life skills and livelihood options outside classroom during the pandemic. And some are likely not going to go back to, they won't be going back to teaching. So with schools reopening, there may be a shortage of qualified teachers as a result. How can we build on this fact and ensure that learning continues with better motivated teachers who can fend for themselves and yet offer quality teaching? So how do you keep teacher motivation going when you know that some teachers have left the profession because they are have got other jobs and maybe are earning better elsewhere? So how do you keep teachers' motivation going and offer high quality education? Who would like to take that question? David, maybe?
It's an important question to be able to answer, isn't it? I mean, the fact of the matter is we've heard from right around the world, many people who are in teaching not wanting to continue because the experience of teaching during the pandemic has been so difficult. So how do you motivate people who are feeling very stressed and really wondering, saying, this isn't what I signed up for, right? So you're saying that some people are in Uganda, some people are leaving because they can be better paid elsewhere, right? So you look at that as a pull and a push factor. Well, maybe you want to equalize what you're offering teachers so that they're not so easily drawn to those other positions. I mean, that's one of the things to look at. I think the other things that we have to understand is that what teachers are going through right now, I'm not sure motivation is going to be the number one thing. I mean, you're motivated because you care about your students. You're motivated because you're wanting to get through this, but you're really worried about your colleagues. You're seeing colleagues die. You're seeing family members die. You're worried about violence at home and things like that. For those people who I think are looking for some kind of additional outside intrinsic motivation, I think the thing to do is what we've seen is you have to create community. You have to create networks. You have to be able to provide information. You have to give transparency to what you're doing. It's not very motivating for teachers, we've heard, to read about schools opening or closing in the newspaper and not being a part of the conversation about that. That's not very motivating. It's not very motivating being told that the risk to teachers is acceptable, but that the risk to some other profession isn't. I think the messaging there is really important. And I'm not sure what we still are in the middle of, probably one of the biggest experiments ever to happen, horrifically. And what's going to happen as a result to the teaching profession coming out of it? My prediction, my thinking is that a lot of people are going to have a different view of teachers and an importance of physical schools as centers of communities, and teachers as trusted professionals in those communities, and people that share information and knowledge, whether that's around vaccines or anything. And I think that is motivating if that's coupled with respecting their rights and paying them what they're worth.
Thank you. Now, maybe one question is for IIEP. And so maybe I'll ask Suzanne to answer this one for IIEP. The question is, what's IIEP doing in the short term or in the long term to respond to this pandemic and to situations of crisis?
Sure. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you to all the panelists. So IIEP has been involved since March in offering support to UNESCO member states whom we serve, preparing guidance, liaising with a wide range of organizations, including Education International, WHO, UNICEF, etc. IIEP has been part of the larger UNESCO response to COVID to support education during the pandemic. And this includes the global, the big initiative from UNESCO headquarters has been the Global Education Coalition, which many organizations have been part of to try to have a common focus on continuity of learning and support to education. IIEP itself has been has been providing individual countries with a lot of individual support for like contingency plans. We've been offering guidance. We've had an online platform which allowed peer-to-peer exchange, which I think has been really important. This strategic debate is another example of having people who are dealing with very similar issues share information and share what solutions they've tried and continuing challenges. Going into the future, we are really thinking as we design our next strategy about what does this, what's this pandemic mean for the future? And I was very happy to hear David's conversations. Can we really capitalize on the pandemic to transform education systems to better serve all and serve at equality? So we're very engaged in those conversations. Barbara, you might want to also add something about your own research. You're a better spokesperson for that.
Yes, for sure. I mean, our research at the moment is focusing on the intermediate level of education systems, those teacher mentor programs that Swarnali was talking about. And it's all about how do you get this collaboration going between the teachers? How do you make sure that they are supported and trusted? And I think a lot of that has been touched upon today, how it's really important to give autonomy to the teachers and to trust them as professionals and to make sure that they're supported in doing that, rather than having a system that is pointing the finger at them, but on the contrary, making sure that they're supported. So that's what we're working on at the moment, and precisely looking at the role of instructional leaders at the middle level of education systems. And I think they potentially, and I think we've seen that in India, had a great role to play in providing support to teachers during that time of crisis and making sure that there was this cohesion and trust between the teachers. And in future, we'll be doing more research also on improving human resource management and the tools that need to be in place, because we're really lacking a lot of information on teachers, and especially in such times of crisis, if you don't have up-to-date data on teachers, how do you have access to them? How do you reach out to them? Is really important, and we know that teachers are a really scarce resource, that teacher shortages are looming. So we really need to be making sure that teacher management is strengthened. So that's what we'll be turning to in future. We have only 2 minutes left. So do we have time maybe for the speakers to just say just very quickly three words that they took away from this discussion? Maybe Motiram, we haven't had any questions for you. What are the 3 takeaways that you take away from this discussion?
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. The 3 things I've just taken away from this discussion is that it has widened our horizon of thinking and just collecting the knowledges from different experiences from the globe, including Guyana to India especially, and Nepal to Philippines there. Actually, as David has highlighted and prioritized that, we teachers can get our rights only through organization and organization. We are also feeling it in Nepal. And one positive aspect we have got from this COVID impact in among Nepalese teachers who are working in private schools is that we have found there is an increased consciousness and awareness about to form and to be the member of organization. That is what the very much positive aspects we have obtained throughout the country. And one thing is that, and another thing, as Sonali has highlighted, that we teachers also needed to be to have a psychosocial counseling equally. And that is one thing I have just gathered it. And the another thing is that as we had also conducted technological literacy among teachers who are working in private schools with the support of Education International, that was also quite beneficial for teachers to be organized in union, so that they can have the very much union rights in coming days. That is also very much important that we have found it. And these experiences we have already obtained from and knowledge from these all participants is quite very much fruitful and quite supportive to us to be engaged, to be glued to our profession in coming days too. So that also it may help us to make those quality teachers to be remain in this profession in coming days too. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mutiram. I think these were great concluding words. We don't have time for more, unfortunately. I'm sorry, Juanita and Swarnali, it's already time, unfortunately. I would like to thank you all so much for your engagement and your availability for this discussion. It's been truly insightful. I'd like to share my director and Michaela Martin for their continued support, the translators, Nadia, Raul, and Punam, the IT services, and the research and development team, and all the other people that were involved and behind the scenes to prepare for this session. I'd also like to inform you that the next strategic debate will be on the 13th of April, and the theme will be education and COVID in refugee settings, when crisis meets crisis. So thank you all again. I hope it has been as fruitful for you as it has been for me. I'll now turn it over to Suzanne for some closing remarks.
Well, very briefly, again, thank you to all of you. First of all, it's really gratifying to see how much interest there is in today's topic, and I want to thank all the panelists who spoke with passion and compassion. I think their insights were extremely valuable. And David said teachers are parents, but remember, parents are teachers, and as our children's first teachers, we should understand the critical role that teachers play in our children's development. So if I can send you off with one thought, it's to be grateful and express that gratitude to a teacher today and every day. We are greatly indebted to teachers, and we need to support them in the days ahead. Thank you very much for being with us. We look forward to seeing you again in April. Bye-bye now. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Take care, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Juanita.
Thanks, Barbara. Bye-bye.
Thanks, David. Bye.